This is Real Housewives of the Kingdom, a sweet space where you'll hear from the hearts of fellow housewives in the kingdom of God, some just like you and some really different in various walks of life. We will talk about how God is walking with us through the good and the hard. I pray you'll be encouraged and entertained as we laugh and sometimes cry together. Most of all, I hope it reminds you we're in this together and you are not alone. Today on the podcast, as part of my Children and Parenting series, I'm interviewing Kimberly Amici. Years ago, while living the busy wife and mom life, saying yes to all the things, God gave her insight to slow down and create a family culture. What does it look like to cultivate a family culture? Today, we are talking all about it, why it's important, and how she is using the wisdom God gave her to encourage others through coaching, writing, and her own podcast. It's never too late to start. Listen in and get some tips on finding your family's why so you can navigate your hows through the twists and turns of life. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Real Housewives of the Kingdom podcast. Today, we are in our parenting and children series, and I am really excited because I have with me Kimberly Amici, who's the host of the Build Your Best Family podcast. And I am going to let her introduce herself and explain a little bit more about herself and her podcast. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to get to meet you over Zoom.
Yes.
And over this interview process. So I am a mom of 3 teenagers. I have a 15, 17, and 18-year-old. We're in like birthday season, like they all kind of have them. So it's like I have to think and remember like who's what age right now. So I have basically 2 at home, and then I have a freshman daughter who's away at college.
Mm-hmm.
And so I live with my husband right outside New York City. We've been married for 22 years. And yeah, so we've been doing this parenting thing for a while. I am a family culture coach, along with, like you mentioned, I have a podcast. I'm also a writer, and my background is in design and architecture. And so this idea of imagining, planning, and building your best family just is kind of like right up my alley. And yeah, I just love working with families to help them imagine what they want to be together and then help them to take the steps to put that into place.
I think it's so important, especially in this day and age where life gets busy and things are crazy. And if you're not intentional, then your life will run you instead of deciding how you want things to go and allowing God to kind of infuse into that. That is what we are discussing today, because I think that in marriage and family and children, that we do need to be intentional. And so we are going to just dive in a little deeper into kind of what your passion is with this and where it came from. So you kind of already started to explain what family culture is, but if you want to just dive in a little bit deeper to why it's important.
Yeah. So when I talk about family culture, I like to liken it to some of the brands we know, like whether it's Zappos or Costco or Amazon or even Anthropologie. Like we know what we're going to get when we show up at these stores and when we interact with them. And that's their culture. They've decided ahead of time what their mission is, what their values are, what they stand for, what kind of experience they want the end user to have. And we can also do that as a family. So when family culture is what kids can expect when they come home, after a long day at school, it's what your relatives can count on when they come to visit you on the holidays. It's what friends can experience when they stop by unannounced. So, just as in business, family culture refers to how we relate to one another, how we work together, and how we achieve goals. And it's just the way we do things. It's what can be expected. And what I love about culture is that it has a much greater influence on parenting and what our family life will be like than the how-to tips and tricks, right? Because family culture is really the undercurrent of who we are. And we all have a family culture. It's just a matter of whether or not we build it or drive it intentionally. And so for us, our story was that we were, overscheduled, we were disconnected, we were burnt out, all the things, right? We just kept saying, let's just get through the week and let's just get through this month. Let's just get through the year. And I felt like we were going nowhere on purpose. And I didn't want to live that way. And so what I decided that I was going to change everything by creating a mission statement. And that mission statement was going to change everything. So this the short version of the story is that I went through this process of creating a mission statement. I made it look pretty. I put it up in the living room and it changed nothing. So so I realized that I had to do a little bit more work than that. And that's when I discovered culture. And really, my journey with like really falling in love with this idea of creating family culture came from the business books and the leadership books that I was reading and understanding how successful organizations use culture to create success and to thrive. And I realized that these same principles that they use in the workplace can help families. So just like in a business, understanding and planning purposely your family culture helps you make decisions. It gives your family a sense of belonging. It tells your children that they matter and that they're part of something bigger than themselves. And it energizes people, and these are all the same things that culture do in an organization. People like to show up for things that they know matter. People like to show up for things that they know that they're a part of, that they're making a difference. And when we intentionally create our family and its culture, we're providing that for ourselves and for our kids.
And I'm sure for you too, living near New York, I know. So we've worked in New York. We actually lived in Jersey City when we were working in New York. But it's so busy there. And I feel like it's part of the culture to fall into the busyness. Was that hard to fight against that? Because you just like, that's kind of what's around you there.
Well, I don't think once we established our values and got a sense of what was important to us and what mattered, it was a lot easier to fight the busyness because all of a sudden we had a plan. We had, a framework to work within. And so immediately one of the first things that it did for us was it allowed us to say yes to the things that mattered and no to the things that didn't. And so I was volunteering. I became a stay-at-home mom and I was volunteering for everything because I was at home and I thought that's what you should do. And I enjoyed it. But then I was like, okay, I'm going to get serious about writing online. I'm going to like stop everything. Right. And so I like started saying no to things, but that wasn't the best thing either. And it wasn't until I determined my values and figured out what was important to me and my husband that I was able to say better yeses to other things. And so I was asked to chair a committee at our school, and it was an entrepreneurship program. And it was an immediate yes because it lined up with our family's values. And since then, I've been able to say no without feeling guilty, to the bake sales, to, volunteering here and there, but really like owning where I'm willing to step up because it lines up with my family's values. I like to be busy. I've struggled with busyness myself because it's like there are times when I get my sense of self-worth and value from it, especially when you're surrounded by people that love you for what you accomplish and for what you do. And you enter in these conversations and everyone wants to like commiserate of how busy they are. And so, there are times when I would feel left out, but at the same time, like this conversation would come full circle and they'd be like, so what are you up to? And then I'd be able to share just this piece that I have at not saying yes to everything and not feeling like I need to sign up for everything and not feeling like I need to compare myself to others and then therefore like compete and like make sure my kid is doing X, Y, and Z and then make sure I'm posting that online. Like it just knowing your values and understanding culture and determining them on purpose and not trying to just go with the flow, that makes a huge difference. It really allows you to step back without feeling like you're missing out.
And that's a huge piece, I think, because so I love the book, The Best Yes by Lisa TerKeurst, because I have a tendency to do the same. I love the people in my life. I want to be there for them. I want to do as much as I can for them, say yes as much as I can. But like you, there were times that I felt like once I said yes, that I was resenting that I said yes. And now my heart wasn't even really in what I was doing. And that was tiring, and then you kind of are on this roller coaster and you're like, okay, gotta get off of this roller coaster. But I love what you said, that you turned your focus rather than making sure you said no to the things, but making sure you were saying yes to the right things. And then the fact that it was driven by what was important to your family, because I think it's so important to know our why. So when you started to implement this, you said you put up the values in your house and it didn't change anything. How old were your kids when you did this?
I really started down this journey when around 2014. So my kids were 6, 8, and 10.
Okay.
And so they were young enough that they were, pretty much oblivious to whatever I was doing, but at the same time, like old enough to understand when we started to talk to them about this concept and started getting them involved in the process of creating culture. They were very much able to have a conversation. I always encourage people that I coach. I'm like, your kids know branding. Like at a very young age, your kids, before they can read, know what store you're walking into based on the colors, based on how things are laid out, based on like they know where they're going. They know the tunes to the songs on the show, like on the commercials, like they get branding from a very young age. And that's essentially what we're doing as a family. And I don't, I know some people might bristle at this idea, but that's what branding is. Who are we? What do we stand for? What do we believe in? And so, you know, my kids were young, but they got it immediately because I began asking them questions like, well, what is this family? What happens when you go to this family's house? And what happens when you go to that family's house?
Mm.
And they were able to immediately tell me the things that they could count on when they would go over, what the atmosphere looked like, what was like. They were able to tell me whose houses they like to go to and why, and whose houses they didn't like to go to and why not. And that's all culture. I am grateful that sort of learn about this early on. But at the same time, it's never too late to start to take control of your culture.
That's awesome. And like I said, with my mom and dad doing that within our family, it was very countercultural. And I think it's countercultural to be super intentional about it, unfortunately. Like you said, society rewards you for doing all of the things and for pleasing all of the people. But I love, like, for me and my husband, so growing up, I did a Bible study with a bunch of women that were close to our family, that we went to church with, and it was called God's Priceless Woman. And we talked about really intentionality of who God calls us to be as women, who God calls us to be as wives, who God calls us to be as mothers, who God calls us to be as friends. And we went through scripture and like just poured over this over years. And I started doing this when I was 14. I started seeing marriages and I was like, I don't want my marriage to look like that marriage. And I don't want my marriage to look like this marriage, but I want my marriage to look like this. And I started to develop what I thought. And it's funny because obviously I didn't attribute it to this is the culture I want to create at the time, but essentially that's what I was doing. And when I met my husband and we started dating and I started seeing that, okay, yeah, this is it. This is the guy. And I would tell him, this is what I want. This is what I want our marriage to look like. I don't want it to look like this. I want people, I want us to always be intentional about our marriage because, I think marriage really displays God's plan for society and for humanity. And so I was very intentional at telling my husband when we were dating that, which is kind of rare. And not to say that we didn't have to learn how to communicate and have to learn what that actually looked like once we were married. It's always been something we've had to hold on to, easily slipped out of our fingers if we were not being intentional about it. But 20 years later, I mean, even 10 years ago, we'd be on tour and someone started calling us, his name is Kevin, and someone started calling us Kevaline. Because they were like, you guys are the same person. You guys are just the same person. And I was like, you don't even know, and a lot of most of the people we toured with weren't believers. And so I thought, oh, I love that. You have no idea what a compliment that is to me, that even like on tour and when we're like both working in high stress, no sleep situations, that's what people got. And I'm like, cool. So I definitely think the intentionality piece is important, and really thinking about your motivation, like what is it that you want?
Yeah. And I think what was the big transformation for us that took the mission statement and really brought it to culture was understanding what practices surrounded those values that we had decided for ourselves. Because, those value words are great to say, oh, creativity is important to us. Well, what does that look like? You digging down and saying it looks like approaching everything we do from a standpoint of creativity and brainstorming and thinking out of the box. Like, okay, so like starting to set practices in place and understanding that we're going to approach things a certain way. And then all of a sudden we had something to like measure it by, to track, to coach, to celebrate. It's not just about like, oh, we're the fun family. Well, what does that mean? Because it fun family for one person can mean fun family for another person. And
Right.
so you get that next level of conversation and really setting the tone for what these values look like in our life really helps us to live them out. And then you get on autopilot. And then you have experiences like you have where you're like, your family is blank, blank, blank. And you're like, oh my gosh, thank you, because that's like what we want, you know?
We were trying to do that.
Yes,
We did it.
yes.
And I love that you said you got your kids involved in it. I think sometimes in society, people, like you said, your kids were young, but you still talked to them about this idea and brought them in on, look, this is something we're all doing together. Because I think
Yeah.
sometimes I've heard friends say, oh, well, my son is just too young to understand that right now. And I
Mhm,
think
mhm.
that is such a hard thing, because kids can understand things, like you said, they understand branding at such a young
Mhm,
age.
mhm.
And I love the idea of putting the idea of family culture as a branding thing, because it just I think it helps people, I'm sure,
Yeah.
understand the impact that it could have in your
Mhm,
family.
mhm.
Now, as you guys began implementing these things, what were some of the things, like, for instance, do you want to say what your family's like mission statement is?
Right. So our family mission statement says, God first, we honor him with our choices. As a family, we support, respect, and continually forgive. Our home is a safe place to be yourself. We do all things well, steward well, and we're generous. We do not settle for average. We continue to grow and learn. We celebrate life and create beauty together. Integrity marks our lives.
I love that. So you began to implement this, you brought your kids in, explained to
Hmm.
them the branding,
Hmm.
and how did that look? Did your kids start noticing the difference of, like you said, that they would be able to tell, oh, I like to go to this family's house, but I don't really like to go to this family's house? Was there any pushback with it, or was the family just kind of you all moved towards it once you started cultivating it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we kind of went on this journey when the kids were still young, so it was really easy for them to get on board. I mean, what's so great about kids is, number one, they understood, like, once we went through that exercise with them, they understood like what we were getting at, and then they started to say things like, "Well, we don't want our family to be known for us arguing and bickering all the time."
Mm.
Because so and so's house, they don't even get in trouble when they argue, or they don't even get in trouble when this, sis hits her brother. Like, they immediately were able to even identify what they didn't want to be, which was so exciting for us, because it's one thing for us to be like, you shouldn't, you should get along, and then to have them say, oh gosh, like, we would hate to go over someone's house and think we don't get along. And this isn't about like judgment or being better than another family. It's just that they had this realization, oh, I understand what I feel like when I go there, and I don't want anybody else to feel like that when they come to our house.
Mhm.
And plus, they're old enough to even identify what you're already doing. That's a great place to start in family culture, is to identify what it is that you're already doing. What is it that you already love? What is it that you want to do more of? And so by that point, they already knew, we love to play games together. We love to have people over. And so we were able to just keep building on that and have those conversations. And so there wasn't really any pushback. Sometimes as my kids get older, there is a little pushback, but we've established a foundation. And when we point back to culture and we don't sort of call out some of their behaviors, sometimes they get it. They're like, oh, you're right, mom. Like, because we've created a language by choosing our values. We've created a language that represents our family. And so when we can point to that, you take away some of that defensiveness and some of that, like,
Mhm.
selfishness that wants to be put into play. And so when we say things like, one of our values is integrity, and that means to honor our commitments even when it's difficult, right? So instead of saying, well, you should be like following through, we signed up for this, we paid all the money for it. No, we say things like, well, integrity is important to us. We honor our commitments even when it's hard. And I know you may not feel like finishing this season out, but this is what integrity is, and we're going to live this way, and we can revisit that later. Like, constantly bringing us back. And so yeah, it's been great to get them involved. And because what we've seen also with the kids is that they're able to make decisions. They begin to really own the identity that we have. They have a sense of belonging, and they're able to make decisions without us. And so, for example, a couple of stories I love is like, my son, we had our whole town had a garage sale, and it was kind of this townwide garage sale, fundraiser for the library. tons of people came to our neighborhood. You just literally would go from house to house to house and just go to garage sales. And he got on his bike and went looking for some Nerf guns. And he was young, like old enough that we're like, are you going to be okay? Like, don't talk to strangers. Like we were still kind of like, all right. And he came home and he's like, Mom, I got a pool table. We have to go pick it up. It's at this house. Like he already knew that he didn't have to ask permission to he didn't have to buy it because they were giving it away for free, but he claimed it and was like, of course this is going to be a yes, because my parents love games. We love having parties. We love having people outdoors. There's room for it in the garage. And now we have a ping pong table in our garage because he knew that this is what lines up with our family. And there's repeated examples of our children knowing ahead of time what our yes is going to be and what our no is going to be, because we've already set the standards. That's very different from like, of course we set standard when it comes to like what we think is right and wrong. But these sort of standards for what our family wants and will say yes to goes beyond that. It's like an employee, culture in a workplace is what helps employees make decisions beyond the manual, beyond the handbook, right? When you know what your company stands for, you can make decisions for your clients, for your customers on the spot. And that's the same kind of thing that happens with culture and family.
Mm-hmm. Disney is an example. So my husband and I worked at Disney. We worked at Disneyland for a long time. And then my husband was an Imagineer right before COVID hit. And their kind of business model is customer satisfaction. And even, the ice cream vendor, the churro vendor, if a kid drops a churro, they're allowed, they don't have to go to their supervisor. They are allowed to just go, here's another churro. Don't worry about it. They've been given that because they've been told that the goal is for everyone to come and be able to relax and enjoy time with their family, and that the company is okay with those kinds of things because that promotes the culture that they want within the parks. And likewise, with your family, when you have other children come over and see how your family runs and how your family does things, it gives them an experience. It gives them a feeling. Like you said in the beginning, what is your family going to expect when they come over for Christmas? What is your family going to expect or what is your neighbor going to expect when they stop by unexpectedly? All of those things. And so I love that concept of applying it like a business model, because I think that's really rare for people to picture it like that.
Hey everyone, we're back with an exciting update.
By now, you may have heard about our premarital guidance course that we've had in the works.
It's a course you can purchase and take on your own time from the comfort of your home at a pace that works for you and your fiancé.
And we finally have a release date. Hubby, drumroll please. September 8, 2022.
Whoop, whoop. That's right. The course will be launching on our 20th wedding anniversary.
I'm just so excited to offer some incredible tools for you to take into marriage so you can have your best chance to beat the 50% of marriages that are ending in divorce.
Hey, baby.
Yeah?
I've got an idea. How about offering special pricing for everyone who buys in the month of September in honor of our 20th wedding anniversary?
Oh, I love that. If you or anyone you know are getting married and looking for a little guidance prior to walking down the aisle, be sure to pass the word on.
Stay tuned to Real Housewives of the Kingdom for details coming soon on where to sign up and what you can expect from the course and pricing, including our special deal. Now, back to the show.
So when did you start actually coaching people, and when did God open up the opportunity for you to give people this wisdom and this insight that God had given you?
Yeah. So, let's see. So in 2016, I was doing a podcast called Slices of Life, and I had two co-hosts, and it was all about intentional living. And that came out of working several years together on Slices of Life, which was a community blog. And so I had been online for a while. And so we went from the blog to the podcast, and then we're about a year into the podcast, and I'm really starting to fine tune what I had already learned about like values and culture. And I was talking about it on the website, and we did a couple episodes of it. And I was kind of had that unholy rest. I don't know, I want to call it the cliche, but I just was like, I want to do something that's just a little bit more niche. Like I want to be able to like stop kind of talking broadly about intentional living And of course, a dear friend of mine who was also in the online space with me was like, you found your thing. Like, you can't stop talking about family culture. You're always talking about family mission. You've taught us how to do it on the blog. You've taught us how to do it in podcasts. What if, like, that's your pivot and that is what you follow? And it was just such this aha moment. And I was like, you're right. And so that was in 2016, 17. And here I am still, like, I could still talk about it because it's so powerful. It's so encompassing. And it really is a game changer, whether you are married and don't have any kids, whether you're married and you're an empty nester, whether you're just starting your family out. Like, it is such a powerful tool in a home, in a relationship, to understand your values, to know what those values are, what those practices are around those values, what your language is, what you will and will not do, and your non-negotiables. Like, it's such a powerful driver in everybody's life. And so yeah, I just kind of did the pivot, and at the end of 2017, 2018, I created the Family Culture Project, which is now, become Build Your Best Family.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. It's so funny with moments like that where you're doing it already kind of, but then somebody tells you, someone sees it from outside, they're like, oh, this is it. This is your thing, Now, you said earlier, any time is a good time. You're an empty nester, you've never done it, whatever. But when would you say is the best time to start cultivating family culture?
I mean, I think, like with most things, the earlier the better. I mean, start before, when you first get married, you should be talking about these things. If you're going to have a family, before you have a family, think about, like, what's important to you, before you have kids. When your kids are young, you can even start to do this when you have teenagers. Like, I don't think it's ever too late. I still think as parents, we have such a powerful influence. Just the other day, I totally missed it on something, and I'm like, okay, we need to reset, and I need to start setting the standard again in my home in this area. And what the amazing thing about culture is that it's small steps over time. And I think that whenever you decide to start, you will start to see progress. When you're consistent and you take those steps, you will start to see change in your family. When I first started working with a life coach, it was a present that I gave myself for my 40th birthday. And I was about a year in when my husband's like, wow, like you've really changed. You really, like, I had become more focused. I had become more passionate about the things that I was doing, because I was not doing everything. I was doing the things I loved. I just had so much more clarity, and he noticed, and that was a big testament to the work that I was doing with my coach. And, a lot of the work that I did with my coach is what I continue to do with other people and with families and in the context of family. And so I think that anytime you start to make small steps over time, you're going to find success. It's not about a big, like, launch, like, and saying, okay, we're going to change everything. That's not how it works. That rarely ever works. It really,
so like the January 1st, I'm going to start a diet, and by the end of January, I'm going to be thin and I'm gonna feel great.
Right. No, it's like figuring out, like, what those small steps are over time, getting lots of clarity on your why, and just making progress. And I mean, I even think, like, and we're constantly revisiting culture. That's another thing. So I would say, like, what are you already doing well, because you're already creating culture? Can you lean into that and then start being intentional about maybe some things that take effort? It's okay. And then revisit it often. Empty nesters, we're right around the corner from that. Like, I'm like, oh, but, like, we're about 3 years from our youngest going to college, and we'll have to reevaluate, like, what are these values look like in our life? And it's a constant process.
Well, and like you were saying earlier, like, spending family time together could look different for different families. Like you said, you had a ping pong table. That was something that your son knew would be something that was good. I think it's good to remember when you're looking at other families and seeing their family culture that, everyone's going to look a little bit different. And like you said, the pivoting thing, I think that's great, because, and I think in life, that is something, even with our relationship with the Lord, we have to continually, day in, day out, go, okay, Lord, I'm giving you this. And do I need to have a change of heart? Do I need to have a change of perspective? what has been the most major pivot through your kids growing up? Were you in a groove at any point and then something kind of really like threw it off and you had to, was there anything that kind of shook you, or because you had kind of set that ground rule, was it easy to kind of pivot?
I think having that foundation of knowing like your values, what's important, what are your non-negotiables, that makes it easier to pivot for sure. I think of, when my husband and I first started out, like we weren't like, okay, we're going to be like soccer moms and a lacrosse family. Like we had to wait to see who our kids were becoming in order to say, oh, wow, that's part of our culture. That's who we are. We're going to be at those games where our kids are going to, come and cheer each other on, and we're going to volunteer. Like that developed over time. And so there's a constant pivoting or going with the flow, but there's a constant like recalibrating of your culture, right? And making sure that it lines up with your why, but then that how will definitely change. But understanding your why makes it easier to pivot. We haven't had any major pivots except for, I do think of COVID. Like that was a major pivot for all of us. We're like, well, our favorite thing to do is to games and to travel, and we love hospitality. So like, what do we do now? And we kind of shifted pretty quickly, probably out of like necessity for sanity, but we did like 3 or 4 virtual game nights. Like we did a minute to win it where we dropped little goodie bags off at friends' houses. And then we got like 9 families on a Zoom and we did these competitions against one another. We have the game Taboo. We dropped off half the deck of cards at a friend's house, and then we played families against family. We played Taboo. So like we found other ways. We dropped off little things at people's houses. Like we weren't able to do hospitality like we used to. But we ended up we did little goodie bags for some of our friends. We dropped off like a deck of cards. We printed out 3 sheets with our favorite card games on it, gave them like cookies and popcorn for them to have their own family game night. So like we got real creative with what those things looked like. We continued to travel, hit the road and went down to Florida. And then we were able to do some road trips and stuff. But so even the way we traveled pivoted, what we did and where we went and how we enjoyed our time together changed greatly. But we already knew that those were like tent poles for us. Like
the motivation was still the same. It was just how.
Yes.
I like what you said. The why will stay the same, but the how will change. And that's really good. And I also love that you said about just the small steps, slowly making the change, because I think that's important to remember as you're starting to make changes in your family, that it is the long game. It's not going to happen overnight. And that's something with marriage too. And I think a lot of people get discouraged when they don't see major results. But when you look at a family that's doing something well, or you're like, oh, I love that they do that, what you're not seeing is the years that they poured in prior. And so it's in our culture, our microwave, instant, Amazon to your door in an hour culture, we have this desire for things to happen quickly and let's just get it to happen. But I love this idea because it slows you down and makes you really think about what is important. Now, do you see your own kids, now that some of them are adults, do you see them starting to create their own ideas for family culture?
Yeah, like they're definitely contributors. One of the things that we do with our family is we do a family retreat. So once a year we try to get away and really do like a 360 peer review, much like a organization or a company. And so we'll ask them questions like, what's your favorite thing about the family? What's your least favorite thing? What's working? What's not working? What do you wish we would do more of? What do you wish we would do less of? What do you wish mom and dad would do more of or less of? And so we've created an atmosphere where they can give us feedback. So, we've had times where they both have the same answer and they're not answering these questions together. They're doing it independently. And when we start to see patterns, we're like, oh, okay, that's something we can change. That's something we can work on. And so we've done our best to have them have input into who we are as a family, and then to actually follow up with those changes. And, we launched my oldest off to college this year. And one of the things that she wrote about in her college essay was like deciding who she wanted to be, deciding what she wanted people to feel when she left her presence, and how, she kind of like she did right. Like kind of like when my mom first started doing this, I was like, yeah, mom. Yeah. Family culture. But she's like, I do, I don't know if she's figured it all out yet, but she does have a sense of like who she wants to be. And recently we had a conversation and she's like, she has a boyfriend now and she wants him to come home. And she's like, okay, this is what you have to expect. You have to expect, like, we're going to play games. My dad's going to make some comments about politics. We're going to have tons of food and we're going to be cooking all the time and probably going out to some of my favorite restaurants. Like she knows. And I think, which is fantastic for my kids. And we're still waiting to see if this is actually going to come true. But there is such a strong sense of culture that when they start thinking about their future with somebody else, they're going to be looking for a culture fit. The best companies, they hire for a culture fit. They don't necessarily need the most experienced or the most highly educated. Are you going to fit into this culture? Are you going to be able to serve the customer the way we're serving the customer? Can you get behind our values? And I hope that's what my kids will do. And I'm already seeing a sense of that by who they're choosing to hang out with and who they're choosing to bring home and how they're kind of saying, hey, this is who we are. You either got to fit in or get out. Yep. And not to say that person has to be exactly like us. That's not at all, because culture is bigger than that. But they are starting to create culture in many ways and thinking about like, who do I want to be? And we've always taught them, like, you get to decide who you want to be, how you're going to react, how you're going to set the tone for your friend group, how you're going to set the tone for, your future.
Well, and I think that can also trickle down. Like you said, it is the slow steps, but it can trickle down. I listened to your episode that talked about family genealogy, which was really good. And I love that. I love family history stuff. And I know a lot about mine, but it's really cool. My dad's grandparents, they had 8 children. They really cultivated a very camaraderie with the family, so much so that even though a good portion of the main siblings have all passed, we still, and even prior to that, even when they were all still alive, we get together for family reunions, not every year, but every few years. Usually when one of the main siblings have a big birthday, we all get together. And there's so many of us because there were 8 siblings. They all have kids, grandkids, great grandkids. Now we all get together. We ran out of camp because there's so many of us, and we all wear a color-coded shirt that goes along with the main sibling you went with.
Oh, I love that.
We're all Dutch. And so we all look alike. We all big teeth and blonde hair, and a good portion of everybody is believers. And it's really cool because I grew up with that on my dad's side. And then even my mom's side was very close too. But it's so cool. I think about my great grandma, how she created this family culture, her and my grandpa. So it's so cool to see. I mean, what you do, your intentionality has the potential to impact generations to come.
Yeah, it does for sure. I love that.
I think we'll start wrapping up here, but I would love for you to just give the listeners just a few maybe tips to start out with to infuse family culture.
Well, I think the main thing, and a question when I have on my podcast, I ask people, well, what is your family known for? And that is a question that you can ask yourself. What do we want our family to be known for? You can even get on Facebook, which is what I did, and a few of my guests have also done, just kind of crowdsource the answer, right? And so determine that. Just ask yourself that one question. What do I want my family to be known for? And if you want to just think a little bit more deeply about it, you can ask yourself, when people leave our presence after spending time with us as a family, how do we want them to feel? And then start to envision, what does that look like? What decisions do we have to make? What things do we have to do to make that a reality?
Awesome. I love that. So you have your podcast and you also do coaching. So people, if they're interested, can contact you. And through Instagram, is that the best way for you?
Instagram or the website. Yeah.
That is awesome. So if you want to go further, deeper into the wisdom that Kimberly has infused into her family, you can set up a coaching with her or follow her on her social media, listen to her podcast, and ask yourself these questions that she just said. What do you want to be known for? And be intentional, because it's going to make a difference. And I think it makes you more peaceful. Like you said, when you know what to expect, even when you personally know what to expect when you go home. I think about so many people who have a tumultuous home
Mm-hmm.
And I think you leave a job that's tumultuous and you come home to a home that's tumultuous. And if you are intentional and you're able to create kind of this safe, sweet space that you can at least know what to expect, it
Yeah.
takes so much stress out. It gives you a place to like debrief,
Yeah.
breathe.
Yeah,
So
for
I
sure.
think this is really, really important.
Yeah. And so on my website, if you go to buildyourbestfamily.com/resources, I have a couple of like free resources. And one of them is a family culture discussion sheet. So if you've answered those 2 questions and then you want to go deeper, it's just a list of questions that you can ask yourself. And then there's also a sheet of questions you can ask your kids when you're ready to get them involved in the process. And on that website, I also have like values. If you want to dig deep into like determining your own values, there's a download, a resource that'll walk you through that too.
That's amazing. I will definitely link all of those in the show notes. I'll link your podcast so that people can go on and take advantage of that. So let's move into the rapid fire questions before we close. What is your favorite vacation place that you've been and why?
Okay, so this was really hard for me to choose because because family travel is so like such a big thing for us. We love to do things. And mostly when we travel, it's always different. Like we rarely do the same thing more than once. And so we've taken 7 RV trips together with my parents. And then as the kids got older, we started to take them to Europe. And so we've done quite a bit. So my favorite place, and it's probably because I've been there, it's the only place in Europe I've been 3 times, is Paris. And I'm planning on going back for my 50th with my best friend. So, I mean, like Paris stands out to me. And as a family, I would say if I would talk about like a destination that I loved, we loved Switzerland. It was like, it surprised us the most. You know, I feel like a lot of these places we knew what to expect, and Switzerland was definitely like top of the list. Didn't expect to love it as much as we did. You know, we are actually taking what I like to call our first vacation because we tend to want to jam pack everything into when we travel. And we often go from place to place to place. We did just book Costa Rica. So it's the first time we're going to just go somewhere and stay somewhere. And so we have that coming up this summer. So we'll see how that goes.
And Europe is great like that, like the jumping though, because everything's so close. We've done a lot of Europe. We honeymooned in Paris. We spent our 10-year wedding anniversary back to Paris. And so we love Paris as well. But I feel like Europe is kind of built for that. And there's so much to do. I can't imagine going most places in Europe and just like staying in one and not like at least taking a train to another city for a day or
Yes. I feel like that's my personality though. I'm like, are we doing everything? Are we seeing the quintessential spot? Are we like, we have to make so we're often exhausted from our vacations.
Not that you need a rest day after the vacation. We do that a lot. I do enjoy like laying on a beach, and my husband was definitely more of the like, let's go. But obviously after 20 years of marriage, he spends days on a beach with me. And I also have now grown to love jumping around and doing as much as possible. That's lovely. Okay. What is your favorite scripture or life verse and why?
So because I have a background in architecture, and I've struggled with how to blend like pre-kids with post-kids and still, you know, I still have my hands in design. I sometimes do freelance work. I want to get back into it. The Bible scripture I love is Isaiah 58:12. It says, your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called a repairer of broken walls and a restorer of streets with dwellings. And for me, I feel like this scripture bridges like my education, my talents with the work that I'm even doing now, creating environments where families will thrive. And I feel like it will continue to pivot with me in the future.
That's awesome. And we didn't even get into that, like the designing your home, even to be a sweet space that also kind of goes hand in hand with family culture too, which is a really cool hand in hand. I love that scripture.
Yeah.
And then if you could have lunch with anyone from history, who would it be and why?
So I guess Princess Diana comes to mind. When I was a little girl, I was just mesmerized with her. I remember doing a book report, on her in second grade, and you had to dress up as whoever you were doing the book report for. And when she died, I mean, I still remember where I was when I heard the news and who I was with. And, and since then I've loved watching The Crown or any TV show that's about royalty, just by fascinated. And I know that there's like the good parts and then there's the hard parts and the parts we don't see. And so I think that would be somebody that would be really
it'd be interesting to actually know how she felt. Because I feel like a lot of the royal family, they're not really allowed to talk about how they feel.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just kind of like thrown into it and you're that's who you are. That's what you're born into. That's what you do. And that's part of their country culture, which is so different than America. And so
not a lot of agency over, some of the choices that they make and some of the things they get to do.
And I love The Crown too. That was so interesting to watch all of that. It gave kind of a little more of a humanity to these faces that you see and these people that you hear about. All right. Well, Kimberly, it has been incredible to interview you. I'm so excited to share this episode with the listeners and to share your resources so that people can begin to be intentional. And like she said, you can start today, even if you've never been, if your kids are in college, start creating a family culture today and know your why so that you can pivot and make decisions on your how. Thank you so much for being on the show, Kimberly.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, friends, that's it for today. I'm truly grateful you joined us. If you think others would be encouraged by this episode, you can easily share it by taking a screenshot and adding it to your stories or feed. You can also text it to a friend. New episodes are available every Friday. Be sure to subscribe so you can catch them all. You can find and interact with me on Facebook and Instagram at Married Rogers Neighborhood, as well as my website, which I linked in the show notes. If you enjoyed the show today, I would so appreciate if you could take a second to rate and give a 5-star review. It helps more people find it, which makes a huge difference for me and the podcast. Just remember, we are in this together. God loves you, and you are not alone. See you next time.